Hi everyone and welcome to a new episode of the Allplane Podcast, where we talk with the movers and shakers that are redefining the future of commercial aviation. As usual, before we get into today's episode, I would like to remind everyone that you can find all the previous episodes of this podcast as well as many other aviation stories on the Allplane website. That's Allplane.tv, Allplane.tv. And I also would like to use this opportunity to invite you to subscribe to the Allplane newsletter about innovation and sustainability in the commercial aviation industry. Go to the Allplane website and there you will find a link to subscribe to the newsletter. And now to today's episode, which is about sustainability, but with, I would say, a rather unique twist. This time, it's not about new propulsion technologies or some new aircraft concept or anything like that. It's actually about a piece of innovation that can be surprisingly impactful when it comes to reducing the environmental footprint of airlines. Our guest today is Lisa Conway, Chief Revenue Officer at GenPhoenix. GenPhoenix is a company that produces something called ELeather, which, as the name implies, is a leather-like material. Let's put it this way. What's special with ELeather, and what's the connection to the airline industry? Well, ELeather is produced by upcycling leather waste from tanneries in order to make a lightweight and durable material that can then be used, for example, to make aircraft seat covers. If you have flown airlines such as Frontier in the US or Wizz Air in Europe, you have almost certainly been on seats that are covered by GenPhoenix's ELeather. When it comes to sustainability, the most obvious benefit of ELeather is, of course, that since it's using upcycled material that would otherwise have gone to waste, it reduces the need for landfill space. But in this conversation with Lisa, I learned about some other very interesting properties of ELeather. For example, by upcycling leather, you prevent the organic material from decomposing in the landfill and emitting methane, a gas that has a rather negative impact on the environment. And what's more, the resulting material from this upcycling process, so the ELeather, is more lightweight than traditional leather. And this, multiplied by millions of seat miles, represents a not insignificant cumulative fuel and emission saving for the airlines that use it. So this conversation was actually a rather fascinating exploration of an aspect of not just of aviation sustainability, but of the passenger experience. But I think it's best if I just stop talking now and I welcome Lisa to the podcast. Hello, Lisa. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us from Philadelphia, I think.
Oh, Philadelphia. That's right. Yeah.
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Very good. I think today we're going to have a bit of a different episode of the podcast, because on this podcast, when we've been talking about sustainability in aviation, we have often been talking about propulsion, new types of fuel, electric engines, hydrogen, stuff like that. But today we're going to talk about something different, but it's also sustainability. And that's the cabin, the materials that go into the cabin, and how companies like GenPhoenix are working on new ways to make those materials more sustainable, right?
Yep, exactly.
Great. So I would say first, it would be great if you could give us a bit of an overview. Well, first about yourself, how you ended up in this field, and also about your role at GenPhoenix. And then we can maybe talk about what GenPhoenix does, and particularly in aviation, because I think you work in different industries. So it's not just aviation. You
Correct.
do. Yeah, basically, just a summary for people that might not be familiar, which I guess it's many in the audience. You make the leather that goes into the aircraft seats, aircraft seats and other types of seats as well, because you work in automotive, other industries. So you recycle and upcycle. I'm going to ask you about this. What's the difference between recycling and upcycling leather? And you end up with a product that is superior in several ways to the traditional leather that is used on this type of seats. So I would say, without further ado, it's maybe best if you start by telling us a little bit more about yourself, and then we can talk about GenPhoenix and the work you guys are doing.
Sure. So a little bit about myself. So I went to school for interior design at Drexel here in Philly. I was a commercial designer for, about 7 months before falling into, and I mean that, falling into the sustainable materials industry. So I worked for a company called Interface for about 18 years that makes flooring made of old flooring that also captures CO2, that is recyclable, things like that. And I really had a moment of early in my career with the founder, Ray Anderson, really inspiring me to learn about sustainable business. So it's interesting that I'm now in aviation. I mean, I'm in aviation, I'm in ground transportation. As you said, we're in a lot of different segments, including automotive, as we're moving into that more seriously. And really, the thread between the two companies and my whole career has been materials. So how are they made? And they're finished materials. So the interesting thing about that is that aesthetics matter. This isn't just a part that goes into an engine.
Yeah.
It needs to be beautiful, it needs to perform, but embedded in that is sustainability. And that's what I think is so interesting and what drew me to GenPhoenix
Hmm.
almost 8 months ago, I guess now.
Okay. Tell us more about GenPhoenix. A little bit the background of the company, how it started. You mentioned already some of the areas you operate in, but give us a bit of an overview of the size and scope of your operations.
Yeah, so we are 150 person-ish. We're actually growing right now, so it's probably a little higher than that. Company based in the UK in Peterborough. And we've been around for almost 20 years. And the majority, well, all of those really, our main segment has been aviation.
Hmm.
So we got some early success in making our material. So our material is made from rescued waste from leather tanneries.
Okay.
So you're correct to say that we're leather, but I would say a leather material because we basically reconstitute that leather waste into a high performance textile.
Okay, yeah, I'm
So,
going to ask you shortly about the process and what makes your
yep,
process unique. So the company is based in the UK, but you're based in the US. So I guess it's kind of a
correct.
global operation. So your customers are all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah, as you know, aviation is incredibly global. I mean, I had back-to-back weeks when I had first started. One week I was in Japan and the other week I was in Chile. It was a stressful, a lot of travel. Of course, I got sick.
Yeah.
But yes, very, very global industry. We have people all over the world, and I run our sales team and am in charge of our growth in aviation and ground transportation.
Hmm. So tell me more about this process you started to outline here. So
Yeah.
you basically take all these kind of pieces of discarded leather
Yep.
and you turn it into something that is useful in places like an aircraft seat, for example. Um,
Yep.
this is, so it's not really, I mean, can we say this is recycling? Or that's when I wanted to ask you about the difference between recycling and upcycling,
Yeah.
because that leather, otherwise, what would happen to it? It would just be
It would
taken to
go
a
right to the
landfill.
landfill. Yep,
Uh-huh.
absolutely. So everything that we use was otherwise destined for landfill.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible that this material can go waste to energy, but where we're sourcing it from, that actually wouldn't happen.
Uh-huh.
And as you know, waste to energy is downcycling. So I think we sit kind of uniquely between recycling and upcycling. And the reason is recycling to me is defined as a material that is turning back into itself.
Mm-hmm.
We are actually reconstituting that material to make an even higher performing material. So it
Okay.
has characteristics that you won't find in a traditional leather, like bagging and sagging, and some properties that don't make it ideal for seating, but it might be ideal for other things. We love leather, so we're
Mm-hmm.
not throwing darts at leather for sure because we there are properties that the material holds that
Mm-hmm.
is actually the reason that we can make our material.
Mm-hmm. And the material is biogenic. So it's, I guess, some animal
It
hides or.
Yeah, it's animal hides that have been tanned. So the tanning process for leather is what keeps the material from degrading.
Hmm.
And since it is a biomaterial, since it is came from a living thing, that material would otherwise biodegrade and release methane, which is 25 times more pungent a greenhouse gas
Hmm.
than carbon dioxide itself. So it
Okay.
really interrupts that waste cycle.
Hmm. And tell me more about this process then. What do you do to reconstitute this material? Because it sounds like
Yeah,
a difficult thing to do. I mean,
I
without being an expert,
agree.
but
I mean, the whole time I was going through the interview process and learning more about the company, I was just kind of like continually blown away. And it's not until you go see it and the scale that it happens, right? Because we can all make Apple leather or other like really cool things, but if we can't scale it to an industry like aviation and meet all of the properties that, of course, aviation requires, then that's a big concern. So we say sustainability only matters at scale.
because I guess you need pieces of leather of a certain size and consistency to be able to
Yeah, so
make
let me walk you.
seeds. And then you get what
Yeah,
you
let me.
get is basically some irregular scraps that might be of different sizes, different qualities, different, like the state in which they are found.
Yeah, so let me walk you through it. So first, I always say from the cow, right? So there's the cow that gets raised specifically for meat, and then leather is a byproduct of the meat industry.
Hmm.
So when that byproduct is tanned to stop the degradation process, it is also made into a material with certain specifications for different markets. So through that process, there are offcuts. So trim waste and shavings. So hides obviously aren't exactly the same thickness all the way across. But when manufacturers of products actually buy that, they need it to all the same specification from a thickness perspective. So there are shavings, there's cuts where there are scars on the animal, etc. We can take all of that stuff. And the reason is because we mechanically break it down to the fiber level. So when we break it down to very short fibers that we then a process called hydro entanglement. So if you picture like a dryer sheet and you would be able to poke holes through it, but you can't stretch it very much.
Hmm.
We use the power of water and entangle those fibers into that textile core.
Hmm.
And that keeps it from being able to stretch too much in any one direction and maintains the performance of that material when it turns into a seat. Because as you can imagine, when we go and lots of butts in seats, if you will, over time can stretch a material out, especially like a fabric or traditional leather. This material can be finished the exact same way as leather, so it looks and feels just like leather, but it has additional performance properties that make it
Okay.
into a really great seating material.
So in terms of performance, it's even better than the real thing. I mean, the real
Correct.
thing. It's real, but you mean what I
It's
mean,
real.
like
Yeah. I always,
the
I
traditional
always,
leather.
yeah,
The
exactly.
So you outlined some of the benefits. You prevent these gases from escaping,
Yep.
and also you prevent these from going to landfill, which has another
Hmm.
sort of sustainable implications. But how sustainable is the process itself when you are doing the reconstitution? I guess that consumes water and energy as well, so that has some environmental footprint.
Yeah, no, great question. Because it's important to understand the whole process.
Hmm.
So to answer your question quickly, our electricity is 100% renewable, and our water that does not evaporate through the process is recycled. So we don't need to use new water sources or drinking water or things like that to be able to process this material.
Okay.
So that's the manufacturing side. We still have a thermal energy piece that is always the hardest for manufacturers to address because renewable electricity is easier to address. But that part is very, very small over the entire life cycle of the material.
Mm-hmm.
So for anyone who buys our material, the main impact from a greenhouse gas perspective or carbon dioxide perspective is actually in the supply chain of the product. So I can get you the exact number. I think it's 23.48 kilograms of CO2. That is the carbon footprint that is shared by the leather working group.
Just a quick parenthesis, because shortly after recording this episode, Lisa got in touch and she confirmed that the accurate number from the leather working group is 22.48 grams and not 23.48 as mentioned earlier when we recorded this podcast.
Which is for traditional leather, whereas ours is down at 4.78. So
Okay.
it's a huge drop of about, a sixth of the impact. And we can get you the exact math on that. But the point is that when you're using a waste material, you're not tied to the agriculture and other types of greenhouse gases that are emitted because
Okay.
you're using what was otherwise destined for landfill.
But part of that, I guess, it's included in the original material, like the organic cowhide, or I mean, in a way, it's already in the material, right? So
Yes.
how you take this into account? I mean,
Yeah.
just
So
avoid double counting
because
and all that.
exactly, and you've exactly hit on it, because it's already been counted in the original material, we are
Okay.
able to start for the waste supply chain, the leather
Okay.
waste, we're
Okay.
allowed to claim a Z. So it's called a cutoff,
Okay.
where, yeah, the tannery or the farm that raised the cow is responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions associated with that material. And then
Okay.
what we make, we're allowed to start from a zero, which is why
Mm-hmm.
we only build up to a 4.78.
Okay, because it's considered that it has already, I mean, it's been produced anyway. So it's not
Right.
like you are making an additional impact because it would have happened anyway, because it was, most of
Yes.
the original material was used for something else and that's just a scrap.
Yes, but
Mhm.
because it doesn't then go to the landfill, decompose and release methane,
Yeah.
it's a good thing. So it stops that
Hmm.
process from even more greenhouse gases being released into the atmosphere.
Okay. And what about the cost? How does it compare to other types of leather?
I love when people ask me this because guess what? Nobody's willing to pay more for sustainability.
Well, yeah, I mean
So
that no, but that's true. I mean, that like
true. Unfortunately, yeah.
people when they are asked about sustainability, everyone is in favor of it. But then when it
Yep.
comes to pay with your wallet, that's a different story. And the airlines that have voluntary top up schemes and all that, they tell you all the same story, that there's a relatively small number of people doing that. So
Yeah. No, absolutely. Our whole model is based on price, performance, planet.
hmm.
So the price has to be cost neutral or even save money. It has to perform to rigorous standards that aviation requires. And then we're seeing more people. I loved in your intro, people are coming back around to circularity really mattering, because you are right that the main consideration for aviation is weight, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's the entire aircraft or, you may, and some of the listeners may think like, oh, it's just a seat cover material. How much could that really add up to? Well, it's part of every RFP that we compete in. So we have to be a lightweight material, because that leads to fuel savings. That's actually how we got our main entry into the market, is the incredible cost savings, fuel savings for moving away from traditional leather, especially in this type of market. In our ground transportation market, they're not using as much fuel, right? But when
Okay.
you look at aviation, it matters significantly. So you have to compete on weight, no question. And now, because SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, and other things are so far out in the distance, airlines are looking for ways to make progress in the meantime.
Hmm.
So walking and chewing gum, they want to do that, but they need something else that they can be working on and making progress on in the meantime. And
Hmm.
that's where, okay, if it performs equal or better, if it is cost competitive, and if it's has sustainable characteristics like being circular, both from a made of waste perspective and I can return my seat cover at the end of its life. Those are things that they're looking to start telling passengers that they're doing. They want to get credit for the decisions that they're making, and they need options now.
You mentioned the methane, the landfill avoidance. You mentioned the lightweight as well, which is another dimension we didn't treat in detail before. What are the savings, and can you give me a bit of a ballpark estimate of what does it mean in the life of an aircraft to have, how lighter is your material, and what does it mean over the life of not of an aircraft maybe, but of an aircraft seat, how this translates into kilograms or into dollars at the end of the day?
Yeah, let me actually, so let me just pull them up and I can give you the right numbers. Okay, so a few stats. So we're proud that over 250 airlines fly using our recycled leather material, including American Airlines, Southwest Airlines, and Aeromexico.
250 airlines.
250 airlines.
That's
yes.
a lot of airlines.
It is.
I don't know how many airlines are there in the world, but possibly in the high hundreds or low thousands. So that's quite
when I got here, I was like learning about airlines that I've never heard of, and then a lot of them that I've never heard of are under an umbrella. You realize, like Lufthansa or something like that. So we've supplied materials to cover over 4 million seat covers, including 50,000 airport terminal seats. So we actually kind of go into the airport as well. And 1 in 5 aircraft globally fly using our recycled leather material.
Wow.
The percentages that you were asking about, so our product is 48% lighter than traditional leather, which is partially beneficial or particularly beneficial to our mass transportation seating customers.
So that's a lot. Like you're telling me it's half the weight of a normal.
About half.
Okay. Yes. Because when you mentioned it's lighter, I was thinking, well, maybe it's, I don't know, 10, 15% less.
Yeah.
But that's a lot.
And the way that I wrap my head around it is so traditional leather has a lot of density, which makes you think that it performs better, but the textile core that we use actually makes it so that you don't need that density. So that because the fibers are hydro entangled, as I described, and it's not gonna sag. So that allows you to use the fibers and the textile core to achieve performance instead of density, which pulls a lot of the weight out, if that makes sense. That's just how I've been thinking about it.
Okay. But if this process is so good, why is not 100% of the seats that use it?
That's a good question. So that's why they hired me, to get to 100%.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
The anti-monopoly authorities would have a word.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's if everyone made decisions based purely on facts and money, then I think we would have 100% market share. But there are some things that go along just emotionally and perception-wise with traditional leather that it is the luxury material. Or it might be the cultural material of choice. Right?
Well, actually, not all airlines use leather though in the aircraft seats.
Not all, no. So traditional leather users, there's kind of a quality that goes along with flying traditional leather that means that you're premium, right? Or there's a cultural tie to it. Then we have other airlines, especially on long haul flights, who will use fabric for different reasons as well. So fabric is very lightweight.
But many of the low cost, at least in Europe, I don't know if it's the same in the US. Many of the low cost airlines that I see using these very slim seats, like for example, Recaro seats and this type of new generation seat, they use. I'm not sure if it's technically leather, but they use this leather type covers. It's easier to clean, I guess, than fabric. I'm not sure.
Yeah, exactly. So it's definitely more sanitary, but
Uh-huh.
there's obviously a different hand to it or feel. So it's really just what the airline is going for. But actually, what you're touching on is interesting because when our material came on the market, it obviously, about 50% lighter. It saved so much operational fuel, et cetera. Well, then came, as always does, the entry of synthetic leather.
Yeah, I was about to ask you about that.
Yep,
How you,
which is an
I mean,
oxymoron. Yeah.
for people that are not in the industry or not experts
Yep.
in this, is there really a huge difference? The texture? I'm not sure. I don't have a point of reference. So
Yeah.
how
No,
different they
you
are?
can, they are different. It depends. Not all synthetic mock leathers are the same. So some might have a spongier feel,
Uh-huh.
some might have a more papery feel.
Okay.
They offer the same benefits in terms of being able to obviously wipe clean that fabric doesn't offer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, However, it is not leather. So
Yeah.
some of the inherent things about leather make it an easier move from traditional leather to go to a recycled leather because it still maintains a lot of the properties and the ability to have the same hand and feel as traditional leather.
So I guess the synthetic one is cheaper. So I possibly what we see on
No,
many of,
not
no?
necessarily. No,
Okay.
not necessarily. Yeah, not necessarily cheaper. It's just it doesn't have that circularity story. So
Yeah.
the
What about
most
the sustainability of a synthetic?
yeah.
Like, I have no idea what the process to make it is. Like,
Well, it's mostly made of virgin fossil fuels. So
okay.
just like a lot in this world, if you're given virgin fossil fuels, you can imitate almost anything.
So it's like a plastic, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So what we're trying to do is make not trying to do, have been doing for almost 20 years, is make a material out of waste. That's what our supply chain is. We
Okay.
don't make a material that isn't made of leather waste
Okay.
today. But our
Okay.
process allows us to move into other types of waste to make other materials as well. But our whole fundamental business is based on the utilization of waste.
Okay. You mentioned all these, I think, 4 million seats all over the
Yep.
world. Are there specific airlines or projects you've been working in that you would say, hey, look at this because this is like our flagship project, and that's where people can get an idea of what your e-leather is like?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're on, as I said, we're on Southwest Airlines. We're on Wizz in Europe.
Across the whole fleet or specific?
Um, for Wizz, we are across the whole fleet,
Okay.
yes. And we just got awarded their XLR business as well.
Mm.
So they're one of our most steadfast customers. And what we find in customers like that is the more into sustainability you truly are, the more bought into our material you are.
Actually,
And
we
Wizz has
had
been a
Yvonne Moynihan, ESG head
yeah.
at Wizz Air in
Oh,
one of the previous episodes of this podcast. That
oh,
was
cool.
about a month ago. Yeah,
Oh, perfect,
we
perfect.
we talk a lot at that time. We talk a lot about SAF and
Yep.
other projects in fuels that they are currently running. But I was not aware. You see, I mean, I was not aware of the leather project
Yeah.
as well.
And that's probably one of the coolest examples. So
Hmm.
if you care about SAF, how are you pulling that through to your cabin interiors?
Hmm.
Right? Like because it's all sustainability. So SAF is both here but really far out, and there are absolutely things that we're doing today. But when you really pull it through to your cabin interiors, and we're working with Wiz to tell that story better, because they have been, like, you hear someone like me talk about how great of a customer they are, but does the passenger know about the material that they're flying on?
True. Yeah.
If they don't, read a press release or read a news article. So that's one of the things that I'm most excited to work on with our steadfast customers is how can you get credit with your passenger for the way that you make decisions? Because we see it behind
Yeah.
the scenes, how serious airlines can be.
Yeah.
But the passenger should know that as well.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, for example, I was not aware. I'm supposed to
Yeah,
be one of the,
exactly. See?
I'm supposed to be one of the people that should know about this, right? So,
Exactly. Exactly.
you do business class seats as well?
Yeah, yeah. Anything that you can fly on. Yep.
Okay. And your customer in this case, do you work together with the airline or you work with the aircraft manufacturer?
So we obviously the main customer is the airline. But for example, you mentioned Recaro, we've been their
Yeah,
catalog material for a long time. So, if you're getting certain Recaro seats, you're our material, even though you probably don't even know that that's what it is.
yeah, yeah. Mark Hiller, the CEO of Recaro, was also a guest of this podcast. So
There you go.
we'll
There you
go.
go. Well, he should know. He should know.
Yeah, but is it the airline says I want this type of leather, or you go to the manufacturer and then the manufacturer goes to the airline and says, hey, we have this, and this option, and you
It's all of those. So
okay.
we also work with design firms who choose our material. Ultimately, we need the airline to be bought in.
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking, there are definitely cases where we get on airlines that we might not even honestly have a contact at the airline because the cut and sew who actually makes the material or cuts it and sews it onto a seat, they might recommend us, or the seat manufacturer might recommend us,
Mm-hmm.
or the design firm might recommend us.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, having contacts at the airlines, they're the ones who are ultimately, maintaining and responsible for seat covers. And that is where the story of our material and all of its performance characteristics make the most sense because they're the ones that are going to have to clean it. They're going to have to decide. We have a large airline who just told us, your material, we don't need to cycle out for 6 years, as opposed to 3. Now, we
Mm-hmm.
have airlines that are keeping it on for 15 years, but this is a very high turn airline. And their experience with us is, hey, we were changing this out every 3 years, and we realized we really don't need to do that. And that bodes really well for us being able to buy more of your material for more of our programs.
Yeah, you kind of anticipated my next question, which is how often do you need to change the upholstery of the seats?
Yeah. Yeah, we have a 7-year warranty.
Okay.
So even the 6 years that they're, saying, yay, 6 years, we're like, well, it actually should last longer than that. But,
Okay.
they have to decide. There's a lot more to whether the seat cover is wearing out or not. It's how often it comes in for maintenance. So if it's in for maintenance for other things, they're basically deciding like, do we let this go another cycle or not?
Okay.
So, but yeah, we have references of over 15 years in flight.
And can you recycle the e-leather after it's been replaced?
I love this question because it gives me the opportunity to influence all of the listeners out there.
Okay.
So the answer is yes, if. So we launched, as I've described, throughout this whole conversation, our materials made of waste. The part
Hmm.
that completes that cycle is being able to take back seat covers and actually also take back the waste from cut and sews who are creating seat covers and have waste from their process as well. So there's that part as well as
Sorry,
reclaiming. Yep.
which part you said from the last thing you mentioned?
So when we sell rolls of our material to be turned into seat covers,
Yeah.
waste is created at that part of the process as well.
Okay.
So we can take back that today.
Hmm.
And the great thing about that material is it's not laminated to foam. So
Okay.
backrests and seats, that's what ruins the ability for our material to be recycled because we can't recycle foam that has been
Okay.
laminated to the seat covers.
Okay.
So what we need everyone that's listening to do is to design seat covers that aren't laminated. And there are multiple ways, reach out. There are multiple ways to do this. But as soon as you laminate it to foam, it kind of ruins the opportunity of our material. There are multiple ways to not laminate to foam, but to still get all of the properties that you want from a comfort and performance perspective
Mm-hmm.
of a total seat.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we're working on a circular seat cover design. And by design, I don't mean how it looks. I
Mm-hmm.
mean how it is truly designed for comfort, for performance, to pass flammability requirements, all of that stuff. But also to allow it to come back to us to turn into a new material that we call Helios, which
Okay.
has all of the same performance properties as our material Essence, which is our primary material that we sell into the aviation market, but allows us to turn it back into itself. So there's a part that we need help with in there
Yeah.
from all of
Unders-
your listeners.
Understood. So we make a call here
We make a
to
call.
do,
Yes.
do it this way. So we will help
Yeah,
the environment. Um,
exactly.
okay, so you mentioned another product called Helios, yeah?
Yep.
I see on your website you have ELeather, Helios, another one called Aurora. Are they all different versions of your
Yeah,
core
so
product?
Aurora is for our consumer market.
Okay.
Yep, not aviation.
Consumer in which sense? Is it like
So handbags and shoes.
okay. Yeah, of course. That's another another
Yeah,
big market for leather. Um,
exactly.
so going back to aviation, how does the aviation industry, perceive this idea of circularity? Is this something you are getting, let's say, lots of interest from airlines based on the circularity argument per se? I'm not just talking now about just the cost, the durability arguments, but do you think the industry is doing enough? Are decision makers in the industry paying enough attention to circularity as a fundamental value in the same way that we are seeing lots of interest in SAF, in other aspects of, let's say, the environmental side of the airline business?
So I think that things like circularity are a tiebreaker. As I mentioned, price and performance are the main drivers. I also think that there's a mistrust in the industry around green claims.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of, you can do this with the material, you can do that with the material. I think there's a mistrust of that being a reality. And some of it is founded, right? Like it makes sense because they know what happens with the aircraft cabin interiors at the end of their life. And the truth is that materials don't get recycled. So if there's a material where it can be recycled, I think that our job as the manufacturer is to doggedly push for that to happen. Because if I just go to an airline and say, this material can be recycled, if I don't follow up and use some of our sales time to be able to actually make that a reality, then I'm no different than anyone else who is saying that something can be recycled, but hoping that you don't get the call. We
Mm-hmm.
want the call. We want to change the industry. We're taking on this topic of circular seat cover design. We don't make seat covers, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But we're spending time trying to influence the industry for how you can design a seat cover so that
Mm-hmm.
we can get our material back because we know that that's not the industry standard way of designing right now. So that's where I hope that we're more of a partner than just a supplier. And that's really where we do best. Wiz was a good example where when an airline really has interest and really wants to partner, that's where they understand that we provide significant value.
Mm-hmm. Is there any constraint on the supply side? Because for example, for biogenic SAF, one of the constraints for further growth is that there's only so much, for example, waste oil to be used in SAF. Is this the same case with leather waste?
No, but it's exactly where my mind went when I was deciding whether to come here. I'm like, well, how
Mm-hmm.
much leather waste is there exactly? Like, is
Okay.
there going to be a supply problem? There's not even close to a supply problem. I mean,
Okay.
the amount of leather waste is unbelievable, and there are no concerns about the ability to scale with this being the supply. There's just The factors are somewhere between 30 and 70% of all leather that's created that goes to waste. So if you think about all of it, and it's funny, our minds kind of went to what else is made of leather, shoes and handbags, like it just goes on and on and on how much leather is used.
Hmm.
So the opportunity to use that waste is not a constraint at all.
What are the next milestones that you have as a business? You mentioned you wanted to have 100% market share, but I think,
Yeah,
yeah.
100% market share. Yeah, that's our rightful
But
amount.
before you get there, what
Yeah.
other intermediate milestones you have?
Yeah, so intermediate milestones are we have them both. We have milestones for the aviation sector, which is obviously to grow our share, to continue to win more programs and to differentiate ourselves from, especially from a growing perspective, synthetic mock leather. So those numbers are, I mean, I have a goal to double what we're doing today. But also sustainability only matters at scale, as I said before. So a lot of the growth trajectory for our company is beyond aviation as well. Today it's our largest market. But we're getting into other markets like consumer. So Coach handbags and Doc Martens shoes are customers of ours. They're also investors of ours in our company. So when you start to think of where is leather, that's where we're going to go.
Okay.
And leather is in so many places. So the opportunity for scaling this is huge. And that's why I came here, because of both the circularity goals that we can help our customers meet, but also the greenhouse gas reduction targets. If you think of a Coach, they're over indexed in leather consumption. It's literally leather is their main environmental footprint, right?
Yeah.
So moving to a material like ours makes so much sense. I
Hmm.
think we're just starting to scratch the surface for our aviation and airline customers, understanding how much they can share with their passengers about what this material does. And it's cool because they sit on that material. So it's not the largest part of the greenhouse gas emissions, is not tied to seat covers, but it is their best chance for storytelling, because the passenger sits on it. They feel it. They have a captive audience there with seatback, IFE entertainment, and the opportunity to tell that story in some really meaningful ways while they're waiting for their biggest part of their impact, which is obviously aviation fuel.
Where can people learn more about GenPhoenix and your
Yeah.
technology and your markets? Is there a
Yeah.
website you can recommend, social media channels, stuff like that?
Absolutely. So, GenPhoenix.com is where you can catch some really great videos. You were asking me about the process, and you can
Mm-hmm.
actually see some videos of the process. So, highly recommend that.
Okay.
You can follow us on LinkedIn, which is our primary channel for communications. And yeah, between those two, also, you can just go into a YouTube hole. So, just go on YouTube and search for GenPhoenix and follow us there, because there's some great tours of our factory,
Mm-hmm.
etc.
Yeah,
So
I love industrial YouTube. That's the
yeah,
best YouTube where you
yep,
can see
yep,
all these things that happen behind the scenes.
yep.
Well,
And two other things that I'll recommend. One is the Green Cabin Alliance. So
okay.
we're a member of Green Cabin Alliance, GCA,
Mm-hmm.
and they have created a good practice guide, which
Mm-hmm.
is great for all members of the aviation industry and gives you even some checklists and some quizzes to see where you are in terms of being a leader, or any place that you are in the life cycle of understanding how cabins can be greener. And the other is the Aviation Circularity Consortium, the
Mm-hmm.
ACC. We've recently become a member of that and have our first project underway for cabin interiors, because they were
Okay.
pretty focused on the aircraft itself and are
Mm-hmm.
now really moving into cabin interiors through their partnership with us.
Great. I'll add links to those organizations on the show notes. And just left for me to say thank you so much for very interesting conversation about this part of the industry that I think doesn't often get the amount of attention it deserves. And I hope this episode will help do so. So thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you.
If you like this podcast, you can support us by giving it a great rating on Apple, Spotify, or whichever platform you get it from. And remember, you can, of course, subscribe to it. And you can also get regular updates through the Allplane website. That's Allplane.tv. We have a newsletter where we cover the aviation industry every week with a special focus on innovation and sustainability. So give it a go. Thank you and goodbye.